So English Test cricket is in a state of disarray at this moment. They've lost their last 5 Test series, they've only won twice out of their last 18 matches, their captain has resigned, their managing director has been replaced, several of their coaches have either gone or are in the state of transition. So all in all, a really messy situation. And seeing all of this mayhem, it got me thinking back to a time where English cricket wasn't in such a state of messiness and disrepair. Quite the opposite, actually. Back around a decade ago, 2009 to 2013, it was the first phase where I'd started watching a lot of test matches in England. And during that process, I saw that the English Test side was actually the exact opposite to what it is today. Successful, consistent, stable, and central to all of that was Jonathan Trott. Now, Trott's not usually the batsman that's brought up by English cricket fans fondly remembering that era, and it's not hard to see why. The two men immediately above Trott in the batting order, Alistair Cook and Andrew Strauss, formed the last good partnership England had, with Cook reaching his career peak during that phase, and Strauss being immortalised by several in the England cricket community as the skipper who won the Ashes Down Under and led his side to that number 1 Test ranking. And below Trott in the batting order, he typically batted at number 3. You had the likes of Kevin Peterson and Ian Bell. Now, when they played together, KP played the more imperious innings than Trott. I mean, the 186 in Mumbai or the 149 at Headingley in 2012. It's pretty hard to play test knocks that have as many astonishing strokes as those. And with Ian Bell, the sight of him leaning into the ball and creaming a dreamy extra cover drive, or producing the most gentlest late cut to guide the ball to the fence, we're always going to attract more eyeballs than Trott's typical clip towards mid-wicket or punch down the ground. So Trott wasn't the most stylish stroke maker England had when he played, nor was he the team's leader or the one who scored the most amount of runs, but he was arguably something more than any of those, his side's most important bat. In his pomp, he was a man who scored when the series was alive or in its decider, and he performed as the rock of the side more often than not, or more so than others when his side was in trouble. And it all started with his very first match. I remember him coming into the side, the England side that is, for the deciding 5th Ashes Test at the Oval in 2009. In the build-up to the match, I remember him being talked about as a bit of a left field pick, actually. Mark Ramprakash had just scored 100 first-class centuries. I think he's the last man still to do so. And he had killed it in the county season that year. I mean, I think in that season, 2009 we're talking about, he averaged something like 90 that year. So some experts and pressmen at the time were questioning Trott being thrown into the cauldron of an Ashes contest level at 1-all on debut, and were preferring the experience of the capped, although previously not all that successful, Ramprakash. But Trott surprised them. After unfortunately being run out for 41 in the first innings, he responded in the second dig by scoring 100. And I do think that noting the circumstances in which the knock came are worth mentioning. The pitch prepared for that Oval Test was uncharacteristically dry and dusty. It took tone from day one. Hardly a pitch that an Englishman in theory is accustomed to be playing on in the modern era, or stereotypically supposed to do well on. And yet he came into that third innings with his side at 39 for 3 and scored a century that helped them to take it, that total, to 373, setting a target of 546 in the process that would prove 197 greater than the Australians could muster. Now, admittedly, there are some caveats. Australia didn't pick the right attack for the conditions in that match. They went in with 4 frontline quicks on a wicket without their specialist spinner at the time, Nathan Horrocks. And by the time Jonathan Trott came into bat, into that second dig at 39 for 3, England had a 210 lead thanks to a shocking collapse against Stuart Broad from the Aussies in the first innings for 160. But it's also true that the Oval wicket was misbehaving a fair bit by the time Trott came out to bat. The wicket was offering some help for the Pacers by bouncing unevenly and turning sharply, even for the part-time, not normally big turners of the ball, spin bowling options that Australia had, those being Marcus North and Simon Kadich. I mean, I recall seeing deliveries pitched on the same length from the tall speedsters and Peter Siddle. He used to bowl 140 clicks those days. Johnson, and even Clark, the slowest of the lot, sometimes bouncing ankle height to the keeper, and other times rearing up to be taken near the glovesman's upper chest. that from a similar length delivery, right? So clearly there was variability in bounce on the wicket. North himself, the spinner, the frontline spinner at this point for Australia, he took a forfeit, and he was able to get so much purchase from the wicket that he even hit Trott on his shoulder with a ball that he bowled that pitched well outside off. So make no mistake, these were not easy conditions to score runs in, and Trott made them, in spades. It was a sign of how his career would largely turn out going forward. After second series blues in South Africa, he feasted on weak Bangladeshi bowling attacks put out against England away and at home, averaging 62 in all against them. But a sterner test awaited him shortly after those series, coping with Pakistan's bowling attack. At the time, the duo of Mohammad Asif and Mohammad Amir were on the radar of nearly everyone. I mean, I remember it, them being called the next great bowling partnership. Both were in form too. Just before England were scheduled to play them in that 2010 summer, they'd taken together 22 wickets each, averaging below 25 against the Australians in a series played in England. Faced with the examination provided of his technique by the duo, Trott passed with flying colours. In a series where overcast conditions and some moisture in the wickets assisted the Asif-Amir combination throughout, he was made player of the series and proved to be, by miles, England's most consistent bat. He averaged 67, more than twice the likes of KP, Cook, and Strauss did. But more than the averages, it was again the nature of the contributions in the match context that shined. At Edgbaston, he struck twin 50s on a wicket with variable bounce to secure England an unassailable series lead of 2-0. And then at Lord's, he combined with Stuart Broad to rescue England from 102 for 7 to 446. Facing a daunting target on a challenging surface, the poor Pakistani batting lineup folded twice, losing the match by an innings, and with it, the series, 3-1. It's a match which sadly people now only remember for the spot fixing done by Amir and Asif, but Trott's innings really deserves recognition. The groundsman had prepared a relatively spicy wicket, and the use of floodlights late on that first day that cast four-way shadows on the ground reduced visibility of the ball for batsmen to see. And despite bowling the intentional big no ball, the two Pakistani quicks did bowl superb lines and lengths, at times probing the outside edge of the bat a fair bit. All things considered, it probably remains Trott's finest innings, and one of the best made, in my mind, by an Englishman at home in the last 20 years. More runs followed down under and at home, with the weakened bowling stocks of Australia away and Sri Lanka and India at home being haplessly flicked and jabbed away on a largely pancake surfaces that were prepared for another 3 centuries. But it was on the subsequent tour to the subcontinent where Jonathan Trott established himself, in my eyes, as a batsman with even more all-round capability. Now, I mentioned earlier how he did play well on a wicket where it was spinning sharply on debut, and his tendency to get down to the pitch, to get to the pitch of the ball, while playing the Aussie part-timers at times during that debut knock, did make me feel like he had the technique to score on those surfaces. But the Aussie part-time spinners were not Saeed Ajmal, then the world's best spinner, Abdul Rahman, or Rangana Herath, so it could have been a fluke. But even though his returns weren't nearly as good as at home, he did play well enough to quash those doubts. In what was a disastrous tour against Pakistan where England slumped to a 3-0 defeat, Trott was England's best bat. It wasn't a great tour for him, he only averaged 27, but he did make valuable contributions in the first 2 tests when the series was alive, with his 72 in Abu Dhabi on a slow low turner, in particular the faint highlight of what was otherwise a dismal England batting display. And as England perished to the wiles of Rangana Herath on a 2-pace wicket in Galle, he proved to be the main bulwark of resistance with a 4th innings 100. And the thing that stood out to me was about how sensibly he chose to use the reverse sweep. I remember him defending, blocking, and then going for a shot with the delivery that was just right and where the gaps were present. And it showed a lot of maturity on his part, because he, like the other English batsmen in the UAE on that previous tour, often injudiciously chose to sweep. So it showed to me that he was capable of restraining himself and adapting himself to different conditions to make runs. Having said that, I did always feel Trott had a fundamental weakness, one that he may not be able to adapt his game to fix. On his initial tour to South Africa in 2009 and a test in Perth in 2010, one of the few times where England, when he played, came up against a fast bowler on a bouncy wicket in the form of Mitchell Johnson, Trott failed. And while the sedate nature of surfaces neutralized that sort of line of attack from the West Indies and South Africa at home, and the absence of hostile seamers in India meant that this flaw wasn't really exploited for a while, it came to the surface soon after. Facing up against a rejuvenated Mitch Johnson in 2013 in an ODI at Bristol, Trott visibly looked all over the shop against his bumpers. This suspicion of mine that he'd struggle against such bowling became a reality by the end of 2013. During both innings at the Gabba in the Ashes Down Under, Johnson tormented him during his brief stays at the crease. Next thing I knew, he had left the touring party. I later found out that he had been suffering from a stress-related illness for a while, one that the Mitchell Johnson episodes must have only further complicated. I remember wondering/hoping that he'd make a comeback, and he did attempt one. He won back selection in the side for a tour to the Caribbean in 2014-2015, but it was a tour that ended in disappointment and really marked the sad end to what was such a promising career. And since he left, I don't really think the English Test side ever recovered. The batting's always been flaky and inconsistent, even in the times where Cook and Root have had periods of heavy scoring. A lot of that now gets blamed to the lack of a suitable replacement for Strauss as opener to partner up with Cook. Yet Strauss as a pure batsman was struggling for form at various points even during that successful team phase between 2009 and 2013. During that period, I remember him being at one point on a 31-inning stretch without 100. And while there have been options tried out at number 3 since Trott's retirement, none of them have actually had a run that's indicated any sustained or convincing degree of success. I mean, you first had Balance, who started with a bang. He plundered the limited Sri Lankan, West Indian, and Indian attacks in 2014, and then was found out by the faster bowlers of Australia when they pitched it up in 2015. Nick Compton came back into the setup looking more assured in 2016 at that number 3 spot, only to lose then his spot in 2017, according to him being a victim of being pushed to play a little bit more aggressively. The likes of Wesley came in and went, leaving little of an impression. I mean, even Root struggled there. I mean, sure, he's very recently moved back to number 3 and scored 200s in the Caribbean, but his stints before at that spot did lead to a significant drop in his run output from when he batted at number 4. So the gap in the top order has remained vacant, and the failure of England to adequately replace Trott with someone having his sort of composure, appetite for scoring big tons, and technique to adequately negotiate lateral movement, whether it be seam or spin, seems to be telling. Now, do I think getting a suitable replacement for Trott would magically fix England's problems of not being a competent test side? Not really. England Test cricket at the moment certainly suffers from several other issues. Their bowling attacks in the recent past have struggled to take wickets and compete against decent quality sides on wickets that aren't slow seamers. Their batsmen, apart from Root and Stokes, haven't really cemented their spots in a Test lineup. A lot of these problems at the moment lay with systemic issues in county cricket and grassroots development dealing with privatisation and conflicting incentive structures, ones that aren't going to go away overnight, even if England get a really good batsman. But it's hard to see how having someone like Trott wouldn't be an upgrade for this English Test side, because even though the pitches aren't as flat as they often were during Trott's time, and someone like him probably wouldn't have scored as many runs, I still feel he would have had the capability to do much better if in the side than what England have at the moment.